Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a Boeing 737 pilot and a member of PMDG's tech team. Many of you have asked for it in my live streams, so today I'm going to tell you the story of my first 4 flights as an airline pilot. This was in August 2018, and from my training base we first went to Prague, then back to the training base, and then to London and back to the training base. So that ended up scheduled around 10 hours of duty time, and it actually was a late duty, so it started sometime around noon and was supposed to finish at sometime around 10 p.m. or so. Now, we met in the briefing room. I have been there like at least half an hour earlier than I was supposed to, and at that time I had studied the operational flight plans, everything already at home on my iPad. And when I got there, the instructor has been there as well already. And on the previous day, I have already visited the crew room just to have an idea where I should actually go. So I think in terms of preparation, I've probably done the very best I could. Now, when the day started, the training captain greeted me with the words, "Right, welcome to real life. But I have to disappoint you, this is not a day that either of us is going to enjoy." Now, he explained to me at the end of the day why he said that. That's because with most cadets, when they come out of the type rating and start their very first flights, they need a lot of mentoring, and they are usually not 100% ahead of the airplane as they're supposed to be, which can create some interesting situations. One line training captain told me a story once that he was briefing the arrival. He briefed that he wanted to use flap 40 for the landing. Keep in mind, this was in cruise flight, and the cadet went, speed checked, flap 40, and tried to move the flap lever to the 40 position. Now, the trainer intervened as quickly as he could, but of course the flaps had just very slightly started to deploy by the time that the LTC pushed the hand of the cadet pilot back. And it must have been a very interesting call to Boeing, like, what kind of inspection do you want us to do when we accidentally extended the flaps in cruise flying Mach 0.78? Alright, so that was the kind of preparation that the training captain had in his mind, and what was probably to come on that day. Now, personally, at that time I've had a lot of flight simming experience, like 7 years or so flying on VATSIM, so I kinda had a rough idea what was about to come. But of course, real life turned out to be different. And doing the SOPs and doing stuff like that was not a problem. We were very well prepared in our type rating for these. What turned out to be very interesting was the interaction with the cabin crew. Like in the simulator, you always had cabin crew knowing 100% of everything. And then in the real life, the captain was out doing the walk around. The safety pilot was of course still in the flight deck, so in the beginning we're flying with 3 pilots if we have a brand new cadet, the line training captain, the cadet, and then on the jump seat you have a safety pilot, who usually is an experienced first officer from the airline, who is not there to watch the cadet, but to watch the captain, to make sure that he doesn't omit anything while he's explaining stuff to the cadet, and that he is actually still on the aircraft and on flying everything. So that's basically how it works. And of course, when the captain went out for the walk around, I was preparing the FMC. Of course, I knew how to read the flight plan and how to put everything in the FMC, but when the cabin crew comes into the flight deck and asks, "Can we start boarding?" That's the first moment. Well, I was just like, well, can we? What's the criteria we have in order to start boarding? That's stuff you don't typically learn in a type rating. So I had to ask my safety pilot, well, can we? And of course we could. So that wasn't a problem at all. But it's this kind of questions that actually caught me on my first flights. Can we start boarding? At what time are we going to land? Now, you might think it's easy, just look at the FMC and tell them the expected arrival time. But in Prague, we had these long protracted S-turn transitions, which can easily add 10 minutes to the flight time. So, what are you going to tell them? Are you going to tell them the time from the FMC? Maybe 5 minutes less, maybe 10 minutes less, because chances are you're going to land earlier? Well, figure it out as you go. Then, of course, when the cabin crew calls you, in my airline it's standard procedure that they call you every 20 minutes to make sure that the pilots are still well. And, well, they called, and of course the standard questions like, are you guys alright? Of course we are. Of course I am alright on my very first day flying an airliner. Do you need anything? No, maybe a salary increase? No, joking. And, well, when you start flying the line, you will discover one thing in the 737. That's that the air conditioning system is total crap. So, it's either too hot or too cold. And then they start calling you like, can you warm it up in the cabin? Now you're cooking us, can you cool it down again? And you're turning that switch by maybe a millimeter. And they call you again, now it's freezing. Okay. Training captain is here to help out. He tells me how to do it. Fine. But it's this kind of small stuff that really gets you when you start flying the line. Now there's one picture that I'm probably always going to imagine or going to remember from my first approach in the 737. It was actually the captain who was the pilot flying because he wanted to give me the opportunity to get some general impressions first before starting to fly myself. So the captain flew over to Prague. And on the downwind, on our turn to the final, I remember looking out the window on the right-hand side and just seeing the terrain down there, seeing everything down there. That was just the impression where I really started realizing, okay, this is cool what I'm doing here. This is really cool. Now, we went on, landed, came onto the stand. It was a self-maneuvering stand, so you taxi on it, and then when the aircraft is turned around, you start it up, and then you can taxi straight out without the need for a pushback. So we came in, parked the aircraft, started the turnaround, and there were like 6 or 7 ground workers maybe, who all stood to the right of the plane. Now, next to that you had the baggage belt. There was nothing happening there. Nothing at all. Now we had a slot, which was rather tight on that one, and they finished the boarding in time. We had completed all our departure preparations, and then the rampager came in and told us, yeah, we still have to load the baggage. I'm looking down to the right-hand side. I see 5 people having a discussion there, laughing a bit, but nobody loading baggage. So 5 people standing there next to the baggage cart, not loading it, and we're about to miss our slot. The captain, of course, couldn't see that, so I told him, like, what's going on there, and he told the rampager, alright, so get that working, please. They started loading it in, and at the end we had, I believe, like 10 minutes to the time that we would miss our slot. Expected taxi time was around 6 minutes, so we requested startup from ATC, and, well, startup denied, you've missed your slot. Alright, so we got to call the company for a new flight plan. New flight plan, by the way, in real life doesn't mean that you get a whole new OFP with new routing and stuff, but it simply means that they're going to submit a new plan to air traffic control with a later departure time. And what happened? New slot in 2 hours' time. Okay, ready message in. Now begins the wait. And we waited and waited and waited. We waited the whole 2 hours. Well, slot didn't improve. So after 2 hours, off we went back towards my training base, and got there 2 hours late. Now came the flight to London, and it should just have been about an hour of flight time. We had like an hour and 15 scheduled for it, so it was a tight flight. We made it over to London, landed, taxied in, stopped in front of the gate, and there we were. No handling staff, nothing, nobody at the gate. Because we were 2 hours late, The airport simply didn't have any staff available. They were all on other flights. And because there was no marshaller, and because the guidance system wasn't switched on, we couldn't even taxi into the gate. So we had to stand there on the taxiway with an engine running for 90 minutes. 90 minutes with an engine running on the taxiway. Now remember, I told you earlier on we had about 10 hours duty time planned. Got 2 hours slot delay, that makes it 12 hours, which is the maximum, but you can go into captain's discretion afterwards. Captain's discretion basically means that the captain has to assess the alertness level of all crew members, and if the captain can determine that all crew members are alert and awake so that they can operate the flight back to the base, then it's legal to do it with a maximum of 14 hours duty time. Normally. There are further limitations. This was a pretty basic explanation, just to have that out of the way. So, we came there, had that 90 minutes delay. That meant we have half an hour more that we could gather in order to make it back to the base. Now, by that time it was also like 1 o'clock at night already. And, well, we got the startup clearance, got out, and I was used from VATSIM that dealing with air traffic control, you are maybe going to get direct like 50% of the time, but if you get a direct, it's just to the end of the controller's point of responsibility. In that case, we got airborne, passing 2,000 feet in London, proceed direct 10 miles final at your destination. I asked ATC, I couldn't believe it, I asked them, confirm that? Yeah, proceed direct 10 mile final at your destination. Okay. Captain smiled at me because in the meantime we had talked a little bit about my flight simulation background, because the captain was quite surprised how well I did on my first day. I can honestly say that. He was pretty impressed by what I did on my first day. And he said in the aftermath already that I was very well prepared and everything. So he just smiled at me and said, you don't have proper air traffic control on your flight simulators. So off we went, direct 10 mile final, passing 2,000 feet in London. Now of course it was 1 o'clock at night, and by the time we landed it was 2 o'clock, so there wasn't a lot of traffic around. And we made it in at 13 hours and 50 minutes duty period. Arrived on stand, and I just looked at the captain and asked him, is this how it's going to go for every day in my life now? And he just said, yeah, well, if you see London on your duty plan, then probably. Because at that time London had some serious staffing issues at the airport we flew to. But the second day turned out to be more or less on time. And ever since I have quite a bit better on-time statistic than I had at that time. However, that was my first impressions on my first day of flying the line. Now, let's also talk a little bit about how flight simulation benefited me in that time, because that did play quite a role. Now, basically, how flight simulation helped me on my very first line flights is it made it possible for me to stay ahead of the aircraft much better than for the typical cadets, because I more or less had an idea already how full flight looks in the 737, because I did that 1,000 times on my personal flight simulator. In type rating, you have the first 4 days, or the first 4 simulator sessions, where you go through the normal procedures. Afterwards it's abnormals. And after that, coming back to doing everything on the normals again is a little challenging, as the line trainer said, but for me it actually went pretty well because I had that flight simulation experience. The other thing that I've been really good on, that most others have trouble with, is dealing with air traffic control. Now, I've been flying on VATSIM for about 5 or 6 years maybe by the time that I started flying the line in real life. And, well, the biggest difference probably was that I could more or less understand ATC very good, which is not as self-explanatory in the beginning as it may seem for many. But that really takes time for new cadets to get into dealing with air traffic control. Now, I've hardly had any problems because it was basically similar to VATSIM, even though clearances sometimes looked slightly different. And overall, that's how I really benefited from flight simulation. Now, I'm going to keep it at this because I will actually make a separate video about how flight simulation helped me in my real aviation career. So that is something that I am going to make a separate video on. So for now, thank you very much for joining. Hope you found this interesting. If you did, please leave a comment below. Maybe leave a like to the video. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so yet. I'm looking forward to hear what you think about it. And overall, wishing you a great evening wherever you are. Looking forward to see you all on the next one.